Welcome to Unlock 360, the podcast for champions of public education. Here we explore the connection between leadership, teaching, and learning, and reveal the keys to getting better results for all students. Each episode highlights a change maker who's turning vision into action and creating schools where both educators and students thrive. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am your host, Wendy York Davoud, and we have another first for you today. Our very first guest serving in the state of Indiana joining us, Superintendent Jim DuBois of Goshen Community Schools. Welcome to Unlock 360, Jim.
Thanks, Wendy. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Yeah, thanks for being here. For our audience, just a bit of background, Goshen Community Schools is a diverse district serving approximately 6,000 students across multiple schools in Indiana. And in his role as superintendent, Jim oversees district-wide strategic initiatives, manages administrative operations through a cabinet of directors and assistant superintendents, and provides executive leadership for instructional improvement, equity initiatives, and community engagement programs. Jim is responsible for setting the district's vision around innovation, equity, college and career readiness, and he recently came out of retirement to accept this position. Jim, to get us started, will you just share a bit about your journey that led you to where you are today as an educator, as the superintendent of Goshen?
I guess it goes way, way, way back. My grandmother rode on, that's a great little story, so I'll just tell it. My grandmother
Let's
rode
hear it.
horse and buggy back and forth to Ball State University for a 2-year program to be an educator in 1925. So I give most of the credit for that to my grandmother, but then from there, I come from a family of educators. My dad was a high school biology teacher and coach, and my brothers and sisters are all teachers, and nieces and nephews, and so we come from a family of educators. And it was an elementary teacher to start. Well, actually, back even before that, I was going to be a therapist. I thought that's what I want to be like. Work with kids and families in an inpatient hospital for children and adolescents. That was my first job out of college. Went to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and graduated, worked for Oakland Hospital, which is Children's Hospital, and decided I wanted to work with healthy kids too, and I wanted to prevent problems. Didn't really want to be a therapist. So again, coming from a family of teachers, I ended up going into education and elementary education, and I love teaching. It was not something I planned on not doing, but back then I wanted to get my master's degree. And so I actually had a master's degree in elementary education. I had a master's degree in administration. So I got 2 of those. I had children and I wanted to do it before they got older. That way I could, if I ever wanted to, but I never want to leave the classroom. Ended up being a principal, and then went to a district for 11 years as superintendent, and then retired, was doing consulting. And then here I am in this district. Goshen Community Schools invited me in to be the interim. I was going to help just fill in for 6 months till they had somebody. And I guess it worked out for both sides. The board asked me to stay on, and I said, I think I'm having fun. And there's some initiatives that I felt that was like low-hanging fruit that we could do. And there's a lot of momentum behind that. So I'm still here, and it'll be 3 years this summer. So
it's really awesome. I think, you're right. Many educators that retire don't ever fully, leave the field, whether they start their own consulting company or serve as a substitute or, go back and become an interim. It's hard to step away completely, but it's wonderful that you're back.
A couple other opportunities to do the same thing and turned it down. I have 5 grandchildren that are in this district, and that was kind of an extra draw to try to make it, something I thought would be worthy of them wanting to go to school here as they age. So that's been part of my motivation in this district.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And coming back or stepping into the role as interim, I'm curious, what was the state of the district when you arrived, and what were your immediate priorities?
Yeah, part of it was that there was just this, like, in the community, they had a history of being a really great school district, and at the time they were just kind of there were factions that were showing up at the board meeting and being very upset, and
Okay.
kind of a political. So one of the things I told the board, my job during as interim was to try to calm things down. And we did that. It's like things are going really well. People are trusting us now. We've been very transparent. Things are moving forward nicely. So I kind of attribute that to some of the strategic planning we did, because that was the second thing I said I would do. I like to do that when I was doing my consulting. We always started out with some strategic planning with the not-for-profit leaders that I would be working with, and that kind of, we went through a little bit of a process to get to a point that we took things forward, and then that's what we were putting in place here in that fall of 23, and that went very well. So I think those are the two big things that they were missing as a clear focus. And they also had a referendum in Indiana. We have you have to do a referendum if you're going to get additional funds. So the referendum that was running out, and there's really not much of a chance to get a referendum. So we had to cut, on our budget. Our education budget was for around $50 million, and we had to cut $6 million out of that spending.
Wow.
So it's
Okay.
pretty significant. So we worked together to put a plan in place. And I honestly thought that's what my job was, coming here, calm things down, put a strategic plan in place that included accommodating for the loss of the revenue that we're going to have in the budget. And then I thought I would walk away. Well, I was stuck around because it's been a lot of fun. Great people here in this district. I've been really impressed with the quality educators we have here, from principals to the teachers and all the support staff. We've got a great board. The board's been very supportive, so that's been very nice.
Super helpful. Yes. Jim, tell us a little bit about your strategic plan.
Not going into too much detail, but just to give the kind of the big pillars. The way I did this in my first superintendency, and it was kind of like what drove us. There's a lot of pieces underneath this, but the idea is we have four big pillars. One is finance. So, what is the vision for excellence in finance in the district? And so that's one of the pillars. The other one would be student achievement, and what's excellence look like at all different levels? What's the graduate look like? Those kind of things.
Yes.
Build that kind of vision in. And then operational excellence. So food service, transportation, everybody has a part to play. Make sure you're doing your safety protocols at school and all those sort of things. And the last one is people. So that includes parent engagement, student engagement, and also employee engagement, all of our, employee groups. We just kind of analyze that, look at the vision, talk about the vision, get the vision clear in our head and what our commitments are there. Those pillars end up being our commitments. And then if we're committed to that vision, then what are the objectives underneath that? And I talk to people and I say, well, if we were going to say, we're going to put a flag at the top of that hill over there, that's our objective. We want to get there.
Yeah.
And then how we get there is our strategic plan. We're here now. We want to go there. That's what we want it to look like. But we're over here. How do we plot our way to that over time? Nothing happens overnight. School districts are really big organizations that take time to move. You cannot have too many focuses. So when you list all those things, you really start talking about who's leading this focus. So food service is doing something that they're trying to be like, they have a subset of the, operational commitment.
Sure.
So does our transportation. Well, they can't do too many initiatives inside their work, but they can do one thing every year. And if the different groups and factions build that, then over time you can kind of have excellence across the district. So that's kind of the strategic plan. Then we have work plans under there and data that we're looking at, and trying to simplify it, because it's all about execution. You can have the greatest plans in the world.
Exactly.
If people aren't executing it, then it doesn't mean anything. So one of the things that we did in the district was institute, I call it the ABCs. It's just really simple. Attendance, behavior. There's a lot of concern over student behaviors. So behavior planning, and then course performance. So ABC, attendance, behavior, and course performance. Course performance for us, we defined as passing our state level. It's called the iLearn test and the iRead test for the K through 3. So that's the data piece. That's what we're looking at. The iLearn for English language arts and math. Those are the two. We want to pass both. So is a student on track? Will they need to be on track in both of those? Are they on track with attendance, behavior, and course performance? That kind of comes from the Johns Hopkins research on dropouts. So if you look at, well, what are the kids that don't make it to graduation?
Yeah.
And you look at this, well, they miss 30 days every single year. adds up. Well, that's one kind of strike against them, or they were sent to the office 5 times a year, and this year was 20, and you start adding that up, and they're at risk of dropping out, or they're not passing the English language arts or math courses, and they're increased risk. So statistically, you put all those together, one risk factor, maybe you can accommodate for, work with, and support a kid through that. But the more of those you get, the less likely they are to have good outcomes in their educational experience.
Yeah.
We fight really hard to do our best with that. And more than just heroes, we need systems in place. So we talk about what are our systems. I'm a big Robert Marzano guy. So
Yeah.
my districts, we just kind of do the high reliability schools work that he kind of laid out. So we start out and we have data teams or PLCs. That's the first thing we did in this district. We put teams together, so everybody's on a team, and then those teams then help drive the work. Then what is the work that we're doing? We want safe and orderly schools. So how do you do that? Well, you get your teams together and you start looking at the data. And you start looking at what's going on in the grade level with behavior. So that's the B part too. We done a lot of work in our district. So one of the big initiatives we did when we first came, a lot of the principals in the data on the behavior office referrals was concerning. It's very difficult to handle kids who are so dysregulated and not ready for learning, and they're disrupting the classroom, being sent to the office. And just a couple students that are having those big issues can cause a school to be kind of under stress. So we were experiencing that. So we set about to do in our teams to do the work with PBIS. So focus on behavior first and work on the safe and orderly kind of stuff. In my past life, when I've done this, we look at it like kind of a 3-year, because to execute something and have it built into your culture is like the worst analogies ever, but I'm going to use it.
Okay.
If you've ever been in a swimming pool and you have a beach ball, I told this to my last board and they were like grown, but if you have a beach ball and you try to hold it underwater while you're carrying on conversations and doing other stuff, it's going to pop up. And so I said, the initiative is kind of like the beach ball. You want to get it part of your culture. And to do that, it's like stay under the water. We want to get it into the culture. And so if we can get the beach ball and you hold it underwater long enough, it loses all of its air and just kind of, it's just part of the milieu of the school. This is how we do things. Oh yeah, here's how we do this. Here's how we do that. Then, it's part of the culture. And so to get there though, you have to in my previous school district was a very football oriented school district. So
Okay.
I took a big sheet of green paper, stuck it on the wall of my office, and I wrote one football that I said PBIS, stuck it on the football field that I drew on that green piece of paper, a little brown football. And I said, we're going to stay with this till we get it all the way into the end zone. We're not going to take our eye off of it. We're not going to let it be like the beach ball that pops out of our culture because we're on to something new. We're going to stay with it till we wouldn't let it leave,
Yeah.
So I like the idea of working with a consultant for that kind of work. So we had hired in my previous district, we hired a consultant. We've done the same thing here. We're working with some people from the outside to help us make this initiative part of our culture, and how you support kids and how you work with kids as they, particularly ones that are dysregulated. You need a kind of a comprehensive strategy on that. So PBIS has helped us. We have different interventions. So that was one of our big initiatives. We're just like in the early stages of talking about a guaranteed and viable curriculum in the district, because eventually you get to grading practices, but we're going to have to stay with guaranteed and viable curriculum work until we get that far enough along. So we're not starting it, full-fledged next year. Our high school's doing a little more than some of our other schools in this area, but eventually that would be like the next phases of this work, kind of teaming PBIS, looking at data. We're also going to then add kind of our guaranteed and viable curriculum to that. And then, so there's a reason why I was in a district for 11 years. I did 3 years of PBIS, three years of instructional practices. And so we had a new evaluation system, worked really hard on building great instruction in every classroom that we could count on. And then we worked on curriculum and data use in those teams, more than just the PBIS part of it, the behavior data work, but also adding in student learning. And so that took us through 9 years. And then the last 2 years, we were in the process of working on strategic planning. How do you look at the data? And every school have their strategic plan that really inspires and moves the school forward. And
Yeah.
so the nice thing about that district, they ended up having a blue ribbon school, which we were in the bottom 20% in the state in scoring on our SOIIPP. Back then, the state test was called the SOIIPP. And then we ended up in the top 25% for passing both English language arts and math. It was the school district that had the highest change in ranking
Nice.
school districts. And it was just that simple thing. It was just like executing, doing what we say we're going to do and executing it. Not trying to be fancy or be too creative where each year we're coming up with a new initiative to write a grant for to keep moving forward. We turned down opportunities to write grants because we just wanted to execute our plan.
I'm a big fan of McChesney and Covey's work on the 4 disciplines of execution. And, one of my favorite quotes from that book and that work is, there will always be more great ideas than there is capacity to execute.
Yeah.
So figuring out what you're going for, being focused and staying the course is really important. That's awesome. Jim, you mentioned a couple of things that reminded me of a relatively recent grant initiative that the district embarked on for, oh gosh, around $185,000, I want to say, for early education program or programs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things when we talk about teaming, in the beginning, it was really simple. Yes, we were focused on PBIS, but we asked our teams to have 2 meetings a week. The team leaders were not the sage on the stage, or just the guide on the side, and they had to come to the team leader came to the principals and team leader meeting once a week, and then managed the agenda, hopefully coming from that team leader meeting. But there was a second meeting that they had each week. So with their leadership team, and then they had a meeting with their team, and then that team met twice a week. Once was on curriculum structure and all these things we're talking about PBIS. And the other one is on how do we support kids with MTSS process. So how do we group and regroup kids? How do we organize this MTSS process? And so working through that, one of the things that we did was a program called Structures of the Intellect and Integrated Practice Protocol, because we looked at kids and we know that kids' performance is based on more than just academics. So we call that, there's 3 areas we look at when I get those teams together. And then there's like the grade level teams, and then there'll be a school-wide team. And it's your MTSS team or your child support teams, whatever you call it. But we look at kids in 3 areas. We talked about the ABCs. That's always important as part of it. But we look at kids in academic performance and also their cognitive performance. You have just some kids that have issues with memory or thinking skills. It's like they're struggling in that area.
Sure.
We not only want to be able to identify those areas, but we want to put in supports for kids for those areas. So what do you do if a kid's not doing well in memory? Usually you just go, oh, well, let's try not to have them use their memory, but we wanted to have an intervention for that. Second area is social emotional and behavior. So area 2, when we look at kids, we ask questions and think about issues that kids are having. What social emotional, they bring that into the classroom and into their learning, and it can be one of the blocks to learning can be what's going on with their social emotional life. Maybe death in the family, they're dealing with loss, so grieving and going through grieving process. Well, that's pretty simple. Let's make a referral to the school counselor who can put a group together of these 3 or 4 kids we have in our grade level that are having grief and loss issues, and then do a small group, or we can invite in mental health from local mental health agencies to do some work with our kids in those groups. So that's area 2. And area 3 is one that we don't think about a whole lot, but impacts kids greatly, and that's physical neurological. So when we're talking about physical neurological, it's things like sleeping. Are they sleeping at night? That was one of my biggest aha moments as a principal. I'm suspending a kid. He's getting in trouble all the time. And I'll never forget being being upset in my office with him again for misbehavior, then asking him, "What did you do last night? Your trouble today." And he said, "Well, not much. My mom sent me in my bedroom and I have a TV in there and I watch TV." So I thought, "Oh, I'm going to talk to mom about watching TV." I said, "Well, she just lets you watch TV?" "Oh yeah, I don't sleep at night." And I go, "What do you mean you don't sleep at night?" And he goes, "Well, I can't sleep since I was born. I've never been able to sleep." And so this was like a aha moment. So I called the mom,
Yeah.
"Have you taken him to the doctor to have sleep looked at?" And so he did have a sleep issue and he really had not slept well.
Wow.
That impacted his ability to kind of just get along with each other kids at school.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
he's at all the time as principal, but I
Yeah.
never, and I felt like I dealt with him for a couple of years and struggled with him for a couple of years and never asked, "Are you sleeping?" So that was part of our intervention plan then for him, was to work with her and to try to put together a plan to get him to get sleep. But also things like what an OT would do, occupational therapist, what they would do with the student, and looking at it more of a continuum. What kind of visual issues might they have? Maybe they're 20/20, but their eyes don't work as a team. That because to see something on a page, your eyes have to work as a team, and you have to, it's like your eyes actually. If you do this little activity and you stare at your the back of your fingernail, and then you put another finger farther away, and you keep looking at your fingernail here on the farther finger, you'll see two. That's because your eyes actually go like this, crisscross, and they target something. Students have the visual ability. They might have 20/20 vision, but they don't have the visual ability to have stamina to do a lot of the work in the classroom. That impacts their learning. That's another potential block. So that's a problem. We can identify it, but what are we going to do about it? We could refer them for therapy outside, but what are you going to do about it? How do you deal with that in a classroom? Some students really struggle when they have to focus near some work at their seat and look at the board,
Yeah.
and then maybe copy something down. They maybe have memory issues, but they also have focusing issues. It takes them forever to do that kind of focus near, focus far. And so what we found is a program. A lady named Ruby Payne was speaking in Goshen, Indiana. I was not in Goshen, Indiana at the time, and talking about children and families of poverty and the work she was doing with families of poverty. And she mentioned a program called Structures of the Intellect and Integrated Practice Protocol, and so SOIIPP. And I took some notes, called her office, got hooked up a guy named Paul Slocum at the Houston ISD, and he was doing a training. So I flew down to Houston, learned about the program, got trained at the first level, brought it back, and we eventually set up a lab in my school when I was a principal. And Ruby's idea was that, and was that if we can identify the blocks to learning,
Sure.
um, get it. And then you think, well, how does intelligence really, how does it, what is it first? Well, I think of it in terms of your ability to focus, attend, and concentrate on the task. Bring information in through your senses, either auditory or visual. Usually it's integrated. You're, integrating multiple sensory inputs, and then you do something with the mental gymnastics, memory, and then you have to, and that's what we look at in the classroom is how well they use this output. Well, any point along the way, his performance can be disrupted and can make
Right.
it harder for them to learn. So the idea would be to take that away. So all this to say is that the grant that we're doing, that we received, was for that work. We have a lab in place for all of our K-4 schools in our district. And so we have 6 of those, and they all have the SOIIPP program, and they're running this lab where they have an individualized cognitive training program. So it is not and it's paper and pencil. It's not on a computer, but they do work paper and pencil on cognitive skills that are important for the classroom. And the way those were developed was a guy named J.P. Guilford was American Psychological Association president in the 1940s. And when we were training in 50s, but when we were training airplane pilots to fly in World War II, they had an IQ test. So to get into the pilot's training program, you have an IQ of 120, physically fit, and have good vision. And then the first application of this SOI work was there, and the military said, can you come up with a better screening tool for us?
Yeah.
Their washout rate was 1/3 of the pilots that went in with IQs of 120, physically fit and good vision, were not successfully trained. They weren't able to fly for that. And we needed lots of pilots. So he said, come up with a better screening tool. So he did what's called factor analysis, looked at, there's 90 different sub tests that he gave on cognitive skills. And he looked at the successfully trained pilots compared to the unsuccessful pilots. That's two different groups. He found certain ones factored out. There were 11 of them actually that differentiated the two groups. So they used 11 subtests to give to all the candidates that wanted in the program, and used that for their screening tool. And the success rate went to 97%.
Wow. Okay.
So you imagine that you're an algebra teacher and someone comes in and says, hey, let's study all of the successfully trained algebra students and unsuccessfully trained algebra.
Yeah.
Let's do the factor analysis on these 90 different cognitive skills and find out which one are the prerequisites to be successfully trained. You could screen out, and if you're an algebra teacher, your success might be 67%, and then it would go to 97% because you were able to do a screening tool. Well, that's not what we do in education.
Right.
We
Yeah.
don't stop there. We say, okay, that's great. We can identify the important requisite skills to do a task in a classroom like algebra.
How do we build those skills?
How do you build those? You take students where they are, build them up to a level. So that's when I talk about there's a block in learning. What is that block? And let's take that down. Let's systematically take it down. Mary Meeker, the lady that designed this program working with J.P. Guilford at USC, describes she was training school psychs at USC, and there's a building where they had all these people work with kids. So it was like the developmental optometrists, the OTs, the PTs, the school psychs were in this building. And she said, we would get together. We were trying to do training protocols that we could, replicate out in schools. And they would do analysis. All they would do, kind of take a kid that's struggling, bring them in, do their screening test, and then they come up with protocols that they put in place to train the students out of this problem. And so in addition to that, this program has the cognitive skills piece, but they also have developmental optometry, which is visual skills. So it's the eye teaming, tracking across the page, focusing far practice. Believe it or not, if you practice that, you get better. I'm a baseball fan. My son's a high school baseball coach. So Carl Yastrzemski every single day did vision training.
Okay.
This practice hitting, so he's a great hitter, probably one of the greatest of all times. And he did vision training every day. So this is like not new, but we just act like in education, it doesn't make any difference. And I think more and more it's becoming a bigger issue when kids work and live in a two-dimensional world. And then
Yes.
we're asking them to develop. There's certain cognitive skills that are going to be delayed, or if you don't have the visual skills. So that's what Mary Meeker found at USC is they started looking at all these different issues. Well, what do you do with a kid who doesn't have auditory processing skills? Well,
Right.
how do you develop that? Well, you can develop it if you just back it up and break it down, and you do. A lot of those issues start with vision issues, even though it is presenting as an auditory processing issue. And you think of auditory processing when you're trying to teach a student to segment sound, to do phonemic awareness, they hear cat instead of cat.
Right.
They don't hear the segments. Well, a lot of times kids that really struggle with that don't have a concept of segmentation. So we need to make sure that we develop this concept of segmentation and then build the audit, and sometimes auditory processing issues get in the way. So it's a complex thing, but in this lab, the bottom line there is we do vision training, vision training, cognitive training, and the third area is physical neurological, which is occupational therapy, which would be sensory integration training. So all this, integrating all the senses. So bouncing in rhythm on a rebounder and then doing arm motions.
I was not familiar until before the show with SOIIPP. And so, one of the questions that I asked you that I think would be really awesome for you to share with everyone tuning in is just can you describe the lab for us?
If you walk into the lab, first off, what we do is we have a highly trained paraprofessional. It doesn't have to be a licensed teacher running the lab. And in the lab, you'll have an area where they do paper and pencil work. So they do a paper and pencil cognitive skills training that then kicks out individualized training plan on the cognitive skills, which include memory, thinking skills, classification. If you think of Highlights magazine in a highly organized way, if you know what that is, like the
Yes,
mini
I do.
picture part of it's, that's part of it. So you have a place for them to sit down and do that work. So a group of maybe 6 kids come in to do their work, and you split them up into different groups. And then there'll be a piece of their program, those 3 pieces: the cognitive part, which includes the learning stuff, the vision training. So there'll be like a heart chart on the wall. Well, a heart chart is you'll read close here on a piece of paper, you know, letters in order, and there'll be a couple lines, and then you'll look through a little window. So you'll read
Okay.
close, you'll look through the window, and there'll be a chart on the, like an eye chart on the wall. And then so it's read a line here, look through the window, read a line there. And it's just practicing, focusing near, focusing far. But you don't do that standing there. We put them on a rocker board. So the rocker board helps with the sensory integration
Okay.
and balance. And if you're not focusing, you're going to be wobbling, or you're going to, tip over. So you have to,
Yes.
and you have to really use it's like your vestibular sense is going to hold you in place, and you have to focus, and you have to do this task. And everything in there is kind of increasing the focus. Think in terms of boot camp what do? They march in order, perfect line. You have to know where you are, relation to everybody to your left, to your right, in front of you, behind you,
Right. Okay.
and precise movements. One of the other things that a way to think of the sensory integration piece is if you were, they have to take their gun apart, put it back together, right? The pieces. If they're really fast, but then they turn the lights off or do a blindfold, they have to do it like it's in the dark, and they can't see their gun. They have to be able to do it from this kind of, so there's motor planning and sensory integration
Right.
that goes on to do that work. Well, we don't do guns in our lab,
Right. Of course.
but they do arm movements, and they do it on a rebounder where you have to stay in rhythm. So there'll be these mini trampolines around with different activities that they do with that. There's
Is this
balls.
the third piece? Is this to address the third piece?
Yeah. So there's some of them specific to vision. One of them is is a, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of but there's beads on a string. So it's 3 beads on a string. So you hold it to your nose on a rocker board again, and you focus on the red bead, the yellow bead, the green bead, red bead, yellow bead, and just go through sequence. So as the person in the lab, you just watch to see that their eyes are working to focus forward, focus back. They do it so many times. That's stamina building on refocusing your gaze, which helps in reading, as you're doing your reading work and fine motor work if you're handwriting and those kind of things. So you'll see these rebounders, you'll see the rocker boards, and Belgao, if you want to look up Belgao, that's another good name for the rocker boards. There's all kinds of work that's done there, and it increases the sensory integration. So again, cognitive skills work, vision training work, and the sensory integration. And there's like a ball you cross the midline with, and it's hanging from the ceiling while you're on a rocker board, and you have to, catch it with the other hand, and then you
Yeah.
throw it this way, and it goes around, and you have to catch it with the other hand, but you track the ball the whole time. And then there's beanbag toss you do, which is kind of this integration of all the senses. So again, focusing, catching, keeping your hands together, and judging how high, because then you change the height of that. You throw a ball into a bucket. There's lots of this kind of judging of distances, and you have to do. So it's a mental thing that you're doing that really is found in the physical part first. But if I had time, I could describe how a lot of this work even ends up being, well, I'll tell you one thing. When they bounce in a rebounder, they learn arm movements. You start to do 3, or you do 1, 2, 3, 4 in rhythm with the rebounder. You have to stay in rhythm. So the
Okay.
cadence, rhythm, you have to focus. You cannot not focus, or they'll lose it. So once you do that, then we add another level. There's a chart on the wall, and it starts out with a human figure doing left, right, up, down, and it'll have those left to right, black and white shades of gray on a wall chart. And then do the next line, which slowly takes away the human figure and has arrows overlaid. And the third one is just arrows, up, down, left, right. Part of the training that they do is they go through that, and they get that down to where they have enough practices and they've done it correctly. And then on top of that, they're going to then do and say. So if the do is say right, up, down, right, left, all in rhythm. And then the next thing they'll have to do is do and say the opposite. So as this layers on, they have to do and say the opposite. So they have been saying and doing right, and
Yeah.
they look at it and do transformational thinking and say, oh, right, now I have to do left. When they see up, not instead of doing and saying up, I have to do and say down. And when I see down, I have to do and say up. It just helps the kids do the transformational thinking. Then you think in terms of some of the mathematics work, being able to do transformation of figures and tell which
Sure.
one is dated. And then, so in addition to that, they would probably be doing some paper and pencil work and their cognitive skills training time. That would be that kind of transformation. Which one's a quarter turn? Which one is, it's kind of like building on all those things for a kid, trying to get them done in it. They go in twice a week for 45 minutes. And then at the end of the year, they go back. My school psych did a dissertation back when I was a principal with this. And to get into the study, you had to be 2 or more grade levels behind in reading.
Okay.
And so you were allowed in the study. So we were looking at third graders. So we had a whole bunch of kids in third grade in my school, which had a lot of poverty. That's why I went to hear Ruby Payne.
Sure.
And the so to get into that study, and then so there's 3 different groups. There was just the SOI group. They just did the lab for a year. And then there's a group that did the lab plus Wilson reading, which was a kind of a direct instruction reading intervention. And then we had a group that was in another school that all they did was Wilson reading. And so we had these 3 different groups. And at the end of the first year, there were, I'm trying to remember my numbers. I think it's like 11% of the kids that did SOI were back on grade level. And it was like 12 or 13% were back on grade level. It would be 2 years growth in 1 year.
That's awesome.
And then the group that was in the other school that had just reading, it was about the same, 9-10% were back on grade level. Their magic happened the year after. So they finished the lab, and then the second year, she did the same thing. She did WISC scores on them, and which was, I think back then it was the WISC 3, but the IQ, their IQ grew too. That was kind of an interesting thing.
That's very interesting.
But at the end of the second year, the SOI alone were 72% on grade level. The group that SOI plus the reading intervention were like 73%. And the other group in the other school was like a 10 or 12% that just had Wilson reading. They were still kind of a lower
So you
group.
had some real data to show that this made a huge impact on students.
Yes. Yeah. So that got me sold on it at that point. It's like, this was, it's just a theory before my mind, even though there's data and research. It was named the top 10 educational innovation of the millennium back, I think it was 78. They did work with the school with this protocol for every kid. And they did IQ tests on all the kids, and were able to, on average, it was 20 IQ points they were raised. They virtually did away with all the special education programming for LD, for mild disabilities. In other words, if a student, for all intents and purposes, was a normal kind of, and you don't know why they're so far behind in reading or math, this practice worked really well for them. So they had great results. And it was when we had a Department of Education back in that time, I think maybe it was 1980 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it worked. So that's what we started. We wrote a grant for this, and our school district is doing that right now. That's why. So we have a great trainer named Dylan. He comes in and has trained all of our people. He came back and supports them, their support, phone calls, etc. And there's a few other training things that go along with that. After a student goes through halfway through, our labs won't be able to do this year, but next year, there's an auditory processing component that's part of it. If the students are still presenting the same kind of problems they had with phonemic awareness.
May I ask a question about that? So fast forward to, today now in Goshen Community Schools, is it still students that are 2 years or more below grade level who are eligible, or who gets this experience?
That was just the study that my school psych did back in the 90s.
Okay.
Old guy. And so, but now part of it is, it's like, well, kids that are not performing well, who would those be? So our kids that are struggling with reading, in K through 2, it could be behavior issues, kids need to they're not self-regulated very well, whatever their issues might be.
So it
and
is
reading.
students who are struggling.
Yes, students that struggle.
So my question is, because this seems like it might be kind of fun, how do you keep the kids who aren't struggling from, like, are they wanting to to have this experience as
Go to the
well?
lab.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and sometimes, it depends on the school, depends on, the personality of the person running the lab too.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Like, why
Yeah.
can't I go in there?
Right.
But it doesn't have to be just kids that are struggling. It could be like, there's this whole, what do kids that are on the spectrum, autism spectrum, what do they
Sure.
need? They might be performing really well academically, but have some other issues.
Okay.
And we found a lot of great success with that. Some of the more severe kids with autism that we were doing brushing and joint compression with some of the kids and really trying to get into what kind of things that help them stay calm and regulate. And so the lab and some of the work done there. I used to have kids that would get in trouble when I was principal that came down to the office. I knew they're in a lab. I had a rocker board in there and a
Yeah.
beanbag. And I said, hey, they might be crying or whatever, really be upset. I said, hey, why don't you get on the rocker board, throw a beanbag? They did that. And then they would just calm. You could see them just calm right down. Something about the vestibular sense and activating certain senses, like the whole body kind of calms down a lot of kids. So
Yeah.
particularly certain kids would come down and they would be, start crying for whatever reason in the classroom, be really upset, and they would come down and I'd have them do that. And not for every kid, but my frequent flyers seemed I try to study them and try to think what might be going on with them. Why are they so sensitive? Why are they so worked up so easily? And a lot of it, I think, comes from this kind of whole sensory processing of information. If I'm sitting here, I feel my chair on my back and on my legs. And if that's screaming to me, I'm trying to listen to the teacher do work, and I feel my shirt on my arms and all the other inputs. We all that are good at paying attention to things, we learn how to shut that information out and attend to what we want to attend to. And a lot of the kids that struggle with this kind of self-regulation have a hard time doing that.
Right. That makes
Feels
so
like,
much sense.
yeah, it's like it's just getting more and more kids that are having those kind of issues. And so we really, that PBIS work that we're doing, this is one of the interventions. We're kind of calling it a tier 3 kind of thing.
Okay.
There's a program called Minds in Motion. I think it's kind of a Midwest thing, but it's for everybody. It's like an extra PE class for everybody. And they go in
Okay.
a lot of these kind of activities, but not in a systematic way where
Sure.
tracking practices that kids have to finish it. And that's kind of a tier 2 thing we do. But it's really a tier 1 because we do it for everybody. So it's not a tier 2. I take that back.
So that's a way that other students who may not necessarily be struggling get to experience some of the fun stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my previous district, we're not doing it here yet, but every student at the end of 3rd grade would take there's a test called Form CR test, which is 26 cognitive abilities that are predictive or that are needed to do to be, if we gave a screening test for all the kids and we looked at the ones that did really well and the ones that struggled at school.
Yeah.
There's 26 that factor out when you do that factor analysis, sort of that Mary Meeker did for school success, 26 cognitive skills that factor out. So we give the test on that, and the ones that are lower, you can print on demand training modules for each one of those that are lower. So what we did in that district was every single student took that test at the end of 3rd grade. They came back in 4th grade and they had their own personalized workbook with their name on it, with their cognitive skills that they were struggling with. And it takes them the place where they could do the work to a place that expands, greatly by the end that to do that cognitive skill that's being asked. And in my previous district, we did that for every kid in 4th grade. And then usually they did during specials. So they have, the start of the library time, they would start out with 15 minutes of cognitive, brain work, kind of cognitive skills, and they get to check out a book and do it. And they would do that in the classroom so twice a week they did that too. Every kid in the district did that. So, but that was probably the only thing we did for every kid.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing how insightful and super interesting. Um, Superintendent Jim DuBois, if someone wanted to learn more about Goshen Community Schools or about this SOIIPP program that you have in place, where would they go or where could they go to reach out to you or to learn more about the district?
Well, for the SOI, you could go to soisystems.com and you know, put some. It's based out of Eugene, Oregon, so that's what the company is. Our website would be goshenschools.org. You can always email me. It's jim.dubois, DUBOIS, at goshenschools.org. And Goshen Schools with an S in there. Goshen Schools with an S on the end of schools. So you can reach out that way. But I would encourage people to look back at some of the work that Ruby Payne's done too. When you kids differently and how they're struggling, I think in this day and age with this two-dimensional world, it's really important to think in terms of why are students struggling in school, and assume it's all academic. So
Yeah, so true. Yes. Also, I am curious, just kind of a fun ending to this episode, each episode this season. Want to give you an opportunity to recognize or shout out someone in education, someone who has inspired you. Maybe they weren't an educator themselves, but inspired you as an educator or as a leader in education.
yeah, I think I told you earlier about my family. So I would say, my grandmother, uh, she was a kindergarten teacher then, and my dad, my brother, my sister, fantastic educators. But if there was one educator other than a family member that I would have to point to, uh, would be a guy named Cyril Cole. He was a principal of where he hired me to be my first elementary teaching job, and just a very passionate guy. Like he insisted on being the PE teacher along with being the principal of the school. So he's just a great educator and very inspirational. I jokingly say, rather than my role model, he was my hero. I mean, he's just a hero. So,
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for being on the show.
well, thanks, Wendy.
That's a wrap. See you all next time. Thank you for joining us on Unlock 360. If this conversation sparked new thinking, share it with a colleague and keep the dialogue going in your school district. Public education is complex work, and progress happens when leadership and teaching move together. I'm Wendy York Davoud. Until next time, keep building the systems that unlock what's possible, because strong leadership drives deeper learning.